Welcome to Arab Center, Washington, D.C. This is Khalil Jahshan welcoming you for day 2 of our 7th annual conference dealing with securitization and security in the Middle East and in North Africa. We had an excellent first day yesterday and covered a lot of issues. Some of you, I'm sure, this morning overlap with yesterday's audience, but I'm sure also that there are some new names I noticed on the list of registrants today that missed yesterday. So welcome to both of you, and I wish you all very constructive discussion during this opening conversation, with which we are starting in a couple of minutes, and with the 2 sessions that follow. So the program today will last just like yesterday, from 9 a.m. Right now to essentially early afternoon to 12:30 this afternoon. Let me say by way of introduction, kind of my introductory remarks today are dictated by the events of this morning. When I look at the news this morning, 2 things that happened here the last 48 hours here in Washington and in Jerusalem that justify, in a way, and emphasize the purpose of this session this morning, focusing on the situation in Palestine and Israel. One is the release of the President's National Security Strategy. It's an important document that is released by every administration, and it has been, of course, touted by the State Department and also by the White House, and in which essentially the president re-emphasized his administration's focus on diplomatic activism in the region, and promising to avoid what he calls military-centric policies of the past, i.e., which is what we're talking about in this conference, hopefully less emphasis on securitization and more emphasis on freedom, democracy, and human rights. As far as the topic of this particular session dealing with Israel-Palestine, I would say that the document did not bring in a lot of new information other than re-emphasizing the commitment of the Biden administration to the two-state solution within the 1967 lines, its support for the right of the Palestinians to have also, their own kind of future, their own states, and with, as the president says, to achieve equal measures of security, prosperity, freedom, and democracy for Palestinians as well as for Israelis. So we will be discussing a little bit of that today. The second development is what's happening on the streets of Jerusalem. We have seen some serious unrest, probably as the Washington Post this morning described it as the fiercest unrest in the contested city in months. And so it's a serious development, which again emphasizes the fact that the Palestine issue, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is at center stage, whether we like it or not, whether we deny it or not. It's still there. And it proves that Israel doesn't have to travel hundreds of miles to the north or hundreds of miles to the south to seek peace with its neighbor. The neighbors are right there. All it has to do is achieve peace in its own capital city, if you will. It doesn't have to go very far. And that's what's missing, that's what's needed, and that's what the subject of this segment of the conference today. Let me introduce our guest, special guest, a good friend today, Hady Amr, who currently serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Israeli and Palestinian Affairs at the Department's Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. He has served in this position since the beginning of the administration, since January 20th, 2021. Hady previously served at the State Department between 2013 and 2017 under Secretary of State John Kerry's. He was on his team working on Israeli-Palestinian negotiations at the time, which was a hopeful period of time that generated some hopes in the region and here for potential progress. And unfortunately, it did not achieve the intended results at the time. From that time, 2010, 2013, Hady served as Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Middle East at the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, where he helped coordinate numerous assistance programs across the region during the Arab uprisings. He also previously held positions at the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. During his career, he worked for or advised various international organizations, including the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and so on. Most recently, he was a scholar with both the Brookings Institution and the Center for New American Security, where he focused on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and on human development in the region. Hady earned a master's degree in economics and international affairs from Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs, and a bachelor's degree in economics from Tufts University. Hady, it's good to have you. We really appreciate you taking time of your busy schedule to be with us. I know a lot of people at State are busy traveling and so on, so I assume your responsibilities this week are even more demanding than usual. So it's good to have you, and we appreciate that. So what we are going to do is divide the time in kind of two segments with Hady. He will have the chance to essentially make a presentation, if you will, in his official capacity as to the continued search for peace and what the administration has been doing or will be doing in this regard. And then he and I will engage in the art of conversation for the balance of our time. So we will give Hady 12 minutes to 15 minutes to state his case, if you will, and then we will move forward with some questions and some answers. Hady, the microphone is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Khalil, for the kind introduction. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Anyway, thank you, Khalil, for inviting me to speak to you today to address the Arab Center's 7th conference. And, as you did in your kind of opening remarks, I just want to say up top, we are deeply, deeply concerned about the situation on the ground, and particularly the human toll. And so as I just, please keep that in mind as I get into my remarks. First and foremost, I'll talk about the situation now and then maybe zoom out and then zoom back in again. In this kind of crisis period, we are really calling on the key parties to exercise maximum restraint and take steps to restore calm. It's been a really painful last 24, 48 hours and even last few weeks. In fact, the recent period has seen a sharp and alarming increase in both Palestinian and Israeli deaths and injuries, including numerous children. And I just want to start out by just sharing some facts and figures with you, at least as of yesterday. Over in 2022, the year has seen more than 24 Israeli deaths, 150 Palestinians killed by Israelis, including 111 in the West Bank, 35 in Gaza, and 3 in Israel. And so it's really been, as measured by those data points, it's really been one of the more painful years in a long time. And so, we feel it's absolutely vital for the parties that have power on the ground to take action to prevent an even greater loss of life. And we send our condolences to the families who have lost loved ones. So just day in, day out, week in, week out, and even Khalil, in the minutes before this discussion began, we are remaining actively engaged with Israeli and Palestinian counterparts to urge them to work cooperatively to lower tensions and discourage armed conflict. specifically, we're urging Israel to ensure its policies and procedures do not lead to civilian harm. And look, the administration remains absolutely committed to rebuilding at the same time. So that's the situation on the ground. We remain committed to rebuilding our bilateral relationship with the Palestinian people, with the goal of with the president's goal of a two-state solution ultimately to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, along the 67 lines with mutually agreed swaps. And we also remain committed, as the president has said numerous times, and just to quote what he said in Bethlehem, standing next to President Abbas, in this regard, the Palestinian people deserve a state of their own that's independent, sovereign, viable, and contiguous. Two states, both of whom have a deep, for two peoples who have a deep and ancient commitment to the land, living side by side in peace and security, both peoples enjoying equal measures of freedom and dignity. So that's the president's vision. He has, stressed, numerous times that Israelis and Palestinians equally deserve to live safely and securely and enjoy equal measures of freedom, security, and prosperity. Obviously, that's not the situation we experience on the ground, but that is the objective that the president has laid out. Now, Palestinian frustration at the lack of tangible progress is understandable, and the administration will continue to look for ways to advance and explore building a political horizon to move in that direction. And look, while it, at least at the moment, while we hope to see bold moves, we know it's not always in the cards, and so we've been engaging with the government of Israel. We've been engaging with the Palestinian Authority. We've been engaging with civil society to try to advance the situation. We've seen as positive some indications in recent months, in the first phone call between an Israeli prime minister and a Palestinian president, which took place earlier this year. And we also saw the Israeli prime minister committing to a two-state solution during his speech at the United Nations General Assembly last month as well, which we also see as positive. But look, while a negotiated solution may be difficult to imagine today or tomorrow, we are still working as best we can to make tangible improvements in the everyday lives of both Palestinians and Israelis to lay the groundwork for a future resolution. And just a couple examples of that. Well, actually, before I get into that, look, we know, right, that half of the people in the Holy Land are Jewish, the other half are Palestinian. We also know that on the one hand, Israel has seen remarkable success with its per capita GDP at about $44,000 a year, at the levels of France, Japan, the UK, and Canada. While, the per capita GDP in the West Bank is 1/10 of that, and in Gaza 1/20th, where unemployment is just about as high as any country on earth. And we know this is an untenable situation that we are hoping to address. So that's why, when the president came into office, we kind of shifted U.S. policy to start addressing that. And our economic assistance to the Palestinian people has been at about $800 million since the administration started. The vast majority of that going to UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, over 600 million. We've also kind of restarted our economic assistance on the ground in the West Bank and Gaza, and when the president was just out in Jerusalem, announced $100 million to support the East Jerusalem Hospital Network. And we've also engaged with the government of Israel to take steps to improve the lives of the Palestinian people in numerous ways, which have included, 40% more water going to Gaza, legalizing the status of many, many thousands of Palestinians in the West Bank so that they have legal status there. Well over 10,000 work permits for Palestinians from Gaza to work in Israel, the highest number in 15 years, and so on. Obviously, we know there are a lot of challenges, and we are, working to address those. Why don't I wrap it up there, Khalil? I know I've taken maybe a little bit more time than I was supposed to as I look at the clock, and go to a couple of your questions.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. That's a good introduction. Let me pick up where you just left off in terms of the delineating. And I know your office at the State Department has done a lot on this improving the quality of life. The question that I have, which is often heard in Palestine, and I'm sure during your travels there and your meetings, not just with officials, but with NGOs and academics and activists and so on, I'm sure you've heard that. I'm just curious, how do you respond to the fact that per capita GDP is a worthy argument economics-wise, but it's somewhat irrelevant when you're talking about the people under occupation, because in a sense, improving the quality of life under occupation without a political horizon is really enhancing the occupation. It's extending the lifespan of the occupation. How do you guys at State and at the White House respond to that?
Look, Khalil, the President Biden has been absolutely committed to rebuilding a political horizon, to reasserting the importance of a two-state solution along the 67 lines with mutually agreed swaps, to what I think is a powerful a moral commitment that Israelis and Palestinians, and let's focus on the words, equally deserve to live safely and securely and enjoy equal measures of freedom, security, and prosperity. That's essentially, that's a very American statement. And it's essentially committing the United States of America to the political vision that Israelis and Palestinians should lead, lives along those lines. We are not forgetting that and forgetting one thing and focusing on the other. We are asserting from the voice of the President of the United States himself that the Palestinian people deserve a state that is independent, sovereign, viable, and contiguous. That's what we're working on. While we're working on that, though, and pushing for that, we also think the President believes, the Secretary of State believes, and I personally believe, as somebody who cares deeply about the quality of every human life as it exists day to day, that we should be doing what we can to lift up every single life, to make it richer, better, more healthy, more prosperous, more free, and more effective. And so that's what we're doing. That's why we have kind of, we've dedicated our economic resources to lifting up Palestinian lives to make them stronger. We've engaged on the ground to try to make Palestinian lives more free, more secure. Obviously, we'd like to see more success, but that's what we're doing. It's not one over the other. It's both.
Is the administration? I'm sure it is aware, but is there a vision? Is there a plan to kind of bridge the gap between, I don't want to be negative, but between the rhetoric, if you will, and the practical step of building a state? is there a practical plan to move in that direction in light, for example, of the upcoming Israeli elections? Okay, we've always admitted that, look, Israel is having its elections. We have to wait. We have to see what kind of government and what have you. What's the plan? Let's assume there is an administration in Israel that's willing to play the game according to Mr. Biden's plan. Do we have a practical intention and plans to move in that direction to translate the rhetoric into actual state building in Palestine?
So Khalil, so two things. So number one, our objectives are clear,
Yes.
I think, and our efforts are also there as well. We have never stopped pushing to advance conversations and building conversations between Israelis and Palestinians to move forward. We're doing that all the time, and including not only the president and the secretary, but my own efforts to bring Israeli and Palestinian ministers together to work through issues. So on the one hand, we are working to build a political horizon where we can move towards a final status agreement, and on the other hand, we're working to make, again, these tangible steps to improve the situation on the ground. Now, clearly, as you discussed, and as I mentioned, the situation on the ground is very difficult right now, from a security standpoint, and we are working to address that again in numerous phone calls and conversations that have taken place over the last 24 hours. At the same time, that doesn't mean we stop pushing on ways to kind of improve freedom of movement for the Palestinian people, and advance other issues. So it's not A or B. It's always both, and we're always pushing on a range of dozens of issues that we're trying to address.
Thank you. Hady, based on my 30 plus years of interacting with particularly the State Department on the issue of peace and the Arab-Israeli conflict, I have to praise you for the fact that, at least on your interactions during your trips to the region, you have really focused on interacting with the widest possible spectrum of Palestinians, including NGOs, including individuals, opinion makers, media, what have you. You've met with a lot of people, and very few people in the past have done that. They limited their interaction to officialdom, if they even included Palestine on their visits to the region. So I appreciate that. But at the same time, I'm sure you detected that there is a lot of resentment about U.S. policy, not about America, not about American people, but definitely the last public opinion I looked at showed that 61% of Palestinians are somewhat opposed to dialogue with the administration, regardless of these good intentions that you delineated. How do you deal with that? Do you sense that resistance out there? Is that frustration? And how do you interpret it to your superiors, if you will?
Thank you so much, Khalil, for that question. It's an important question. And look, I mean, as somebody who is not a career diplomat, although who has spent several different stints in government, going back to the Clinton administration and then a number of years in the Obama administration, but also worked out there in think tanks and civil society myself. Those perspectives are very important to me. And as you alluded to, on my travels as a general matter, when I'm in Ramallah or Bethlehem or Jerusalem or wherever I am, I do my best to start my conversations with civil society as my first, if not on every trip, but as I can in my first meetings. I always try to meet with civil society on the ground and with journalists to get a feel for things and carry forward those views into my meetings with the leadership on both sides, so that I'm doing my best to represent them. And that's why it's also been important to me to ensure that when Secretary Blinken travels out to Jerusalem or the West Bank, he's also met with civil society, and we don't sugarcoat it for him. We have him meet with a broad range of civil society leaders, so he can hear directly from activists who face challenges in their lives, what those challenges are, so he can kind of internalize those challenges and carry those challenges forward in his other meetings. But look, I mean, we acknowledge the challenges in rebuilding the relationship, and all I can say is we started. The president was sworn in on January 20th in the morning, and I was sworn in on January 20th in the evening, and got into work pretty much the next day, even though it was COVID. I've been sitting here in this office for, they let me out occasionally, but we've been working day in and day out, Khalil, to engage and address the Palestinian people, to better understand their concerns, their priorities, and work to improve the situation. Again, that's also why we have restarted from nearly zero our economic assistance to the Palestinian people, as I mentioned earlier, and focusing that assistance to the Palestinians in greatest need through UNRWA. Again, over $600 million, making us by far the largest donor to UNRWA in the world. Focusing in on, again, through our economic assistance through USAID, and our support to the East Jerusalem Hospital Network. So, again, I acknowledge the challenge that you've laid out there, but at the same time, we are doing what we can, and I try to have a pretty open door to engaging with a broad range of civil society actors here in the United States, and that includes the Palestinian American community. And in fact, I believe one of Secretary Blinken's very first civil society meetings as Secretary of State was with the Palestinian American community, in a historic meeting he had in early 2021. So, we are engaging, and we are not kind of walking through the world with blinders on, to hear the concerns that the community has.
Thank you, Hady. Let me conclude with one last question about the Abraham Accords. We all know that the administration was a bit apprehensive early on at the inception of the Biden administration about this accord and its impact. But it's there now, and it seems to have been incorporated as part and parcel of U.S. policy, in the hope that, as the administration puts it, we can build on this. Where do Palestinian rights fit in the context of the Abraham Accords? Are they related? I mean, the impression we have is the Accords have nothing to do with Palestine, really. It's more Arab bilateral relations with Israel. Where do Palestinian rights, from your perspective as an American administration, fit into the equation?
Thank you so much, Khalil. And look, I mean, the administration, the Biden administration, the president, and the secretary clearly want to see a more integrated Middle East, and the Abraham Accords clearly fit into that. But we want to see our partner countries of the U.S. Working more closely together. And so, but on the question that you asked, what I'd like to do is try to quote from the Secretary of State's remarks earlier this year, when he said, look, he said, quote, "We have to be clear that these regional agreements are not a substitute for progress between Palestinians and Israelis." And look, we have been working to leverage the integration of the region to advance progress on the Palestinian track. And so in those conversations, we see governments that have recently normalized their relations with Israel, working to find ways to advance and improve the quality of life for the Palestinian people. And we're going to continue to engage with Israel and all the countries in the region to look for opportunities to expand and deepen ways to make progress between Israelis and Palestinians, and also progress for the Palestinian people. Khalil, I think we are at, if I'm not mistaken, we're close to being out of time.
Yes.
What I want to say is I want to conclude with not only my thanks to you for having the opportunity to have this conversation, but also with a framework that I have for my team, which is every Friday I ask my team, how did we make the world a better place this week? How did we touch the lives of ordinary people? And that's essentially the question. And we're coming up on Friday towards the end of the week, and so my staff knows I'm going to ask that question. And so that's the frame that we have. How did ordinary people's lives improve through the work that we've done? And that's essentially what we are trying to do day in and day out. So while we are committed to the president's vision of 2 states along the 67 lines with mutually agreed swaps, it's not enough to just have that far off commitment that we're working towards, but we're also working to improve people's lives day in and day out. Anyway, just wanted to share that, and my thanks again to you and the center for this opportunity to have this conversation, and thank you very much.
You're most welcome, Hady. Thank you for spending the past 30 minutes with us. We appreciate your frank discussion. I know the diplomatic limitations of answering some of these questions, but thank you so much for being with us and for the good work that you and your staff continue to do, and we wish you the best. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for participating in this conference, the second day of our annual 7th annual conference at ACW. Please stay tuned. Do not go away. We're about to begin our first session for the day, the third session or panel in the conference. And our Deputy Assistant, not Secretary of State, but our Deputy Executive Director will be with you to welcome you to the next panel. Tamara Kharoub will welcome you in just 2 minutes. So please stay tuned. Do not go too far from your computer. Thanks again. Bye-bye.